Good evening. So good to see everybody out tonight. We are finishing up our study in Ecclesiastes. This is the next to last class. So we're excited to jump into the book of Acts in a couple of weeks. May not work. If that starts rubbing, one of y'all wave at me. All right, so we are in the book of Ecclesiastes. We're going to be jumping into chapter 11. Before we get started, Brother Marty, would you leave our minds an opening prayer? Amen, amen. All right, so we are in the book of Ecclesiastes. We've got this wisest, most talented man, one of the most famous, most wealthy to ever live. He's the preacher, and he is deconstructing all of the ways that we seek to find meaning here in life under the sun. And his big conclusion was that it's all hevel. It's all vain. It's all temporary. It's all a paradox. We see this beauty, and we think we've got it figured out, and we try to grab it, and all of a sudden we realize we don't understand beauty. And we see justice, and we think we understand it, we've got it, and then we try to grab it, and we realize we don't understand justice. And this is what he sees all throughout his life under the sun as he chases down all of the things that we even still see chased down today. But he also sees that God is sovereign. God is in control. And it is best for us to fear God and enjoy life. So we talked about in chapter 9, YOLO, you only live once, savor life, labor in God's blessings. And then we looked last week in chapter 10 and all the ways we should avoid folly, all the dangers of folly. And we realized that being wise or foolish it doesn't have anything to do with our intelligence quotient, but really our God quotient, our GQ, and how close we are with God. So we're going to talk about in chapter 11, living and taking risk and uncertainty. Let's read through, we're going to leave out the last couple of verses, but let's read through the first several verses. Very short chapter, Ecclesiastes chapter 11. Verse 1, cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. As you do not know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. Life is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. So, if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all, but let him remember that the days of the darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. Let's stop there. Just a couple of verses anyway. We've spent a year or more now where really we look at each other. We're in Kroger, we're at Walmart, we're at the baseball fields, whatever. We don't see people as people anymore. We don't see them as individuals, much less as souls. we see people walking around as bags of disease, or at least as potential bags of disease. We are scared of touching and embracing, and we are just fearful people. And I feel like it's bled over into other parts of our life, to where we are just overly afraid, over timid of certain things. And of course now, it's always been there, but now it's more mainstream for this push to return to living. Of course, we have reason to hope. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. A lot of good news is out there, and there's this push to return to living. Not ignoring the virus, right? We're not downplaying anything, but the return to living, basically, it's making a statement that life is worth the risk. And I like to suggest to you that the preacher would agree with that sentiment. Life is worth taking risk. I've learned that the Chinese have a word for this. It's called kiasi. It literally means afraid of death, but it describes someone who has this attitude of being overly afraid, over timid. They take irrational steps to avoid risk, really at all costs. Again, I'd like to suggest the preacher would strongly discourage the type of kiasi living. We already know that life is short, life is hell. Our end is death. It is certain and it's unpredictable. Why spend what time we do have being so overly afraid and over timid that we do nothing at all? Of course, I'm not talking about throwing caution to the wind. We just talked in chapter 10 about being foolish. I think if we were just throwing caution to the wind, that in and of itself would be showing folly. But everything, as we'll read here, everything has risk. And it is worth the risk. Life is. And in fact, it is, if we lose our life, it is worth it. It would be better to lose your life than to waste it. I think we'll see that here in chapter 11. So we have these first 6 verses. And he starts with a very unfamiliar statement. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. And we'll talk about all of the various interpretations of this, because I think it is helpful. But regardless of the illustration, we have to remember and think of it in terms of verse 6. Regardless of the illustration, there's great uncertainty, and we cannot wait till everything is perfect to act, or we will never act. We cannot be kiasi. So some see this as a reference to overseas trade. So take your bread and cast it over the waters. Well, there's risk involved in that. So you have this, and especially think about the people in Solomon's day. Going out to sea was no easy feat, right? So it's very risky. But you're taking the risk of selling your bread over the waters with the eventual, it may not be very soon, but with the eventual return, and you'd have your profits from that. But it was a risky venture, but they're being assured that if they take the sensible risk, that they'll benefit from it, although it may take a long time. So nothing ventured, nothing gained. And if this interpretation is true, of course, Solomon's not thinking that we're all going to become sailors, but he's basically using it as an illustration. Say, don't stay in your little shell that you've got. Don't keep in the box. Take a little risk. Cast your bread over the waters. Exchange a temporary sacrifice for an eventual profit. Right? I think that's excellent advice. I see a lot of nodding. So we cannot wait for a perfect time to do this. The one who's looking at the rain clouds or trying to test the wind, he will never act because there will never be a perfect time. Some translations actually render this bread, instead of bread, they render it as bread corn. That is, not cornbread, bread corn, so something that you would actually plant. So you would sow it, which matches with verse 4 if you read. He who observes the wind will not sow. He who regards the clouds will not reap. So this bread corn, something you would throw out. It's actually said that in these days of old, they would literally throw their seed out into the river. They would wait until the flood waters receded some. They would throw the seed out, and they would wait, and it would spring up. But that's also not without risk, is it? Well, if we throw our seed out, we could be eating that. We could consume that now. But if we take that risk, if we sow some, have that temporary sacrifice, we can have an eventual harvest that will give us profit and be good for us. It is worth the risk. It's worth the risk. You cannot wait for the perfect conditions. If you observe the wind, you will not sow. If you regard the clouds, you will not reap. It is worth the risk. You cannot wait. But the wise man is not throwing caution to the wind. He's keeping his eye on things. He knows that the clouds, if they're full of rain, what's going to happen? They're going to rain. And he knows the tree, it can fall any direction, and so he tries to make adjustments to his plan for that because it could fall. But he does not ignore the future gain or the potential risk. He just approaches it sensibly. And he also knows, and this may be the most important part, that he's not in control of those things anyway. It says several times in these few verses that we don't know. We do not know. We do not know. We don't know when the rain's going to come. We don't know what's going to happen with the wind. But it is worth the risk. Again, central to these verses is the recognition of our ignorance. We don't know what will happen when we do things. We don't know how God is going to work. We don't know whether something will bring us profit or not. Our job is to do the work. Our job is to take the risk. My old boss had a figurine on his desk. It was a little golfer. I think everyone except me in the insurance business plays golf. But anyway, on the little golfer it says, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And it stuck with me, and it just makes so much sense. It doesn't mean that everything you work at is going to work or bring you profit, because we all know that it doesn't. We work really, really hard at things, and we look back and say, well, that was a waste of time. None of that was worth it. But if we always work hard, if in the morning we're sowing the seed and at the evening we're not withholding our hand, the harder you work, the luckier you get. But you gotta take the risk. Nothing is without risk. We cannot wait until something is perfect to take a little bit of risk. Cast your bread upon the waters. Are we going to leave verse 1? Yes, we will. Cast your bread on the waters. I think that the most accurate interpretation of this is the oldest. The people that take this, they think that the preacher has in mind the waters representing people. So cast your bread upon the waters. Feed the needy. Be generous. Show charity. Show love. Cast your bread upon the waters. What happens when you throw your bread on the water? It's all soggy. You're not expecting anything back. Right? Cast it. Cast it. It's not yours anymore. You're casting it. Now, we do know that we will reap eventual reward from showing kindness. A kindness shown will result in eventual kindness shown. So we can reap some rewards, maybe in unexpected ways. Verse that comes to mind, Galatians 6, 7 through 10. We're going to reference this several times. Galatians 6, 7 through 10. So I'll read the entire few verses there. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap. For the one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption, but the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap, if we do not give up. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are of the household of faith. Is there risk in charity? Is there risk in showing generosity? Well, of course there is. Of course there's risk there. I could give away something that really I didn't need, that I needed. I didn't know I needed it, but I did. Also, we can't confidently read the hearts of the ones we're helping. We don't know their intentions. We don't know their judgment. We don't know this if it's our friends and neighbors, much less a stranger on the street. Cast your bread upon the waters. Show generosity. Show charity. The preacher warns, verse 5, that human knowledge is inherently limited, and especially concerning the things we would most like to know about. We don't even know how the Spirit comes into the bones of the one in the womb. Actually, Georgia fairly recently asked me where the soul is. That's a hard question to answer. Of course, we don't know. We don't know where the soul is, how it's housed, how it gets there, how it's breathed into us. We'd love to know that. Much less know about the wind or the clouds. There's so much that we don't know. And we're to live and take risk in this uncertainty. Not despite our ignorance, but really because of it. Because look what it says. We don't know which will prosper. Whether this one or that one, or maybe both of them will. Take the risk. Anybody that watches basketball knows that you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. If you don't take a risk, we know that this one will fail and this one will fail because you didn't give it a go. Life is worth the risk. And here we are again back in Galatians 6. Paul is assuring his readers, in due season we will reap. But he's warning not to grow weary. Don't give up. And of course we have these feelings of growing weary and giving up because of our ignorance. We don't know. And we're frustrated of when due season will happen. To give a portion to 7 or to 8 makes a lot of sense when we don't know what disaster may happen on earth. This number 7, you may recognize, we see it many times in the Bible. It's a number of divine perfection. It's associated with completeness. Even many times in the book of Proverbs, number 7 is used to show this completeness. Chapter 6, verse 16, it's describing the things the Lord hates, 7 things. In Proverbs 9:1, the pillars of wisdom, we could go on. So to give a portion, to show generosity, to show charity to 7 is great. That is complete. That's sufficient generosity. To show it to 8, that means that is extraordinary generosity. And that would be best because we don't know what disaster is going to happen on the earth. So to show this extraordinary generosity, it would make sense for the people that are showing that to be the ones that are also extraordinarily blessed. Isn't that us? Isn't that every single one of us? Of course, Christ praised the poor widow's gift. And that suggests that this principle of generosity even goes beyond the one that's extraordinarily blessed. In fact, let's read that. Mark 12. And verse 41. Mark 12, verse 41. Now Jesus sat opposite the treasury and saw how the people put money into the treasury, and many who were rich put in much. Then one poor widow came and threw in 2 mites, which make a quadrans. Some versions say makes a penny. So he called his disciples to himself and said to them, assuredly I say to you that this poor widow has put in more than all those who have given to the treasury. For they put in out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty put in all that she had, her whole livelihood. Did she take a risk? That was her livelihood. Do you think Jesus was exaggerating? She put in all that she had, her whole livelihood. She was taking a risk, and it's worth it. I guarantee you, if we could talk to her today, she would tell us it was worth every penny that she put in, literally. Paul, yeah, go ahead.
Have you ever you ever regretted any money that you donated to your church?
I've not.
I don't think I have either.
If I'm honest, there's been a couple of times where maybe I forgot to give and I was pretty guilty about it. Yeah. I've never, ever felt guilty or regret over putting into the treasury. Paul praised the churches of Macedonia, who out of their abundance of joy and extreme poverty gave according to their means and beyond their means to help the Christians in some faraway land that honestly they probably never met or probably never would meet. 2 Corinthians 8. We cannot wait for the perfect condition to show generosity, to show charity. We'll wait until I've got more money in my checking account. Well, that never happens. We cannot wait until the conditions are right. We will never get there. We will never get there. We have to take risk in generosity and charity. Otherwise, we'll always find reasons. If we're always looking for a reason, well, I can't give it to this guy because he's going to do something dumb with it, you will always find a reason to not give. I think we are being, I think that is the most accurate interpretation here. He's talking about generosity. Cast your bread upon the waters. Let it go. It's not yours anyway. Can't take it with you when you go. We've gone all through all of that in Ecclesiastes. It's not ours. We're here for a short time. Let it go. Take a risk. Maybe something good will happen. Maybe two something goods will happen. Christ calls on us to even show charity and love to our enemies. Matthew 5:43, 45. You've heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, sends rain on the just and the unjust. If we want to imitate God, we will take a risk and show generosity, charity, and love. We cannot wait on a perfect circumstance to show charity, even to our enemies. Any other comments so far? All right. So this sowing and reaping, one of the frustrating parts of it is it doesn't happen right away. Reaping does not always come immediately. Rather, it comes at a certain time. If we remember back in chapter 3, there's a time for everything. To everything there's a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. So it doesn't happen right away, but it comes just at the right time. And it always comes in time to meet our needs. But again, our job is to labor. Ecclesiastes is telling us to do it, to get to work. And the reaping, the harvesting, that actually may not be our job. That may be somebody else's job. Our job is to be working. Throw that seed out in the morning, and in the evening, do not withhold your hand. Our job is to work. These agricultural metaphors seem to tie flawlessly with the metaphors that Jesus used and some of the lessons of the natural law that he taught. They illustrate that mixture of certainty and uncertainty, which is what God has chosen us to live in here under the sun. In the parable of the sower, we have this image of the Word of God as a seed, and it implies that its natural and distinctive power to do something that, apart from that seed, we couldn't accomplish. Let's read Luke's account of that. Luke 8, 4 through 15. Luke 8, verses 4 through 15. While you're turning there, I mentioned that this seed implies this power to produce an effect within us that's not attainable. Isaiah 55:11. So shall my word, that's the word of God, be that goes out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I propose, and shall succeed in the thing for which I sent it. That's certain. His word will accomplish what he wants it to. Now, the individual response by each person, that remains uncertain. Let's read these verses. Luke 8, beginning in verse 4, the parable of the sower. When a great multitude had gathered, they had come to him from every city. He spoke by parable. The sower went out to sow his seed, and as he sowed, some fell by the wayside, and it was trampled down, and the birds of the air devoured it. Some fell on the rock. As soon as it sprang up, withered away because it lacked moisture. Some fell upon the thorns, and the thorns sprang up and choked it. But others fell on good ground, sprang up, and yielded a crop 100-fold. When he had said these things, he cried, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." We might be able to see some indications of receptiveness or even resistance in those that we would give the gospel. But by and large, we have no idea how anyone is ever going to accept or reject the gospel. We have no idea. We cannot know which hearts are going to be choked out by worldliness or sealed from deep commitment by cynicism. The parable of the sower, it teaches these different degrees of openness to the heart, but it's not saying that there's this predestined helplessness of the thorny ground. Saul of Tarsus, I'm not sure that anyone would have pegged him for good soil. And Ananias sure didn't. We know how that turned out. Instead, the parable in Ecclesiastes 2, I would say, is really saying throw it everywhere. Throw it out on the water. Because we don't know whether this one's going to be good or this one or both. We have to take the risk. We have to sow these seeds even on the most unpromising ground. The bread, maybe the bread of life, should be cast on the waters, no matter how contrary to our own human wisdom it may seem. In the morning, sow. In the evening, withhold not your hand. So there's great uncertainty, but we cannot wait for the perfect conditions or we will never act. I think this is one of those things that we all are kiasi about, myself included. Man, I hate to be uncomfortable. Boy, do I hate to be uncomfortable. It's awfully weird to bring up spiritual matters. It's weird to disagree with people. I'm a people person. I find common ground. We get along. I don't have any enemies. I get along with people. If I bring up something and I tell them, God forbid I tell them they're in sin, what if I make an enemy? It may be worth the risk. Is it worth the risk? With regard to teaching and evangelism, the lesson may be that much more urgent with our children. See, we see our children as they may change the world one day. And we really don't know which ones will, so we should teach all of them. In fact, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. If we hope for a child to change the world, we need to do our best to affect that child while we have the best opportunity to do so. Because once it falls, that's where it lies. So, although slightly different from the image in Ecclesiastes 11, the parable of the sower, it's suggesting this same consistent labor, this truth of consistent labor, not because we know of a particular outcome of our efforts, but we don't know. And that's why we do it. We don't know which will prosper, whether this or that, or whether both will be good. So our job is to live. Our job is to work. Take the risk. Take the risk patiently. We don't know when that's coming. We may not see that harvest event immediately. And again, that may be somebody else's job to do the harvesting. Who knows? There's a host of other applicable topics that we could spend our time on. Take risk at work. That's an easy one we could talk about. Maybe you'll get that promotion. Maybe you'll land that account. Take risk in relationships. Take risk in local church service. If you're not taking the risk of serving as a teacher as you should, it would be better to lose your life than to waste it. Don't waste it. If you can teach, teach. Don't waste it. Don't waste this God-given ability that you have. If you have the ability to give to the treasury more than you do, don't waste that. It's better to lose your life than to waste it. If you're able to serve as a deacon or an elder, don't waste it. Take that risk. Is there a risk involved? Absolutely. If you could serve as a song leader, take the risk. It's going to feel weird. There's a microphone. It's recorded now. Don't mean to talk you out of it. Take the risk. Take the risk. It's worth it. It's worth the risk. Do not be too kiasi. Can't avoid risk. Don't be too timid. We need to live and take risk boldly. We've read already Galatians 6:7. Don't be deceived. Whatever one sows, that he also will reap. These illustrations. Go ahead. Yeah.
Think about Jesus and the apostles. Whenever I think about this idea of taking risk, so often we don't take risks because we're unsure of ourselves. We're unsure of our own abilities. We're unsure of our control over the situation, of our influence over the outcome. And yet you think about Jesus walking on the water and calling Peter to come out to him. And as you read in that text, as long as Peter had his eyes focused on Jesus and had his mind focused on Jesus, he was on that water, he was walking. Mm-hmm. But the second he became distracted with the circumstances, the waves, the wind, the water, that's whenever he began to sink. And for myself personally, that has been, I have seen that so clearly within my own life, and my experiences, that as long as, whenever I'm taking a risk, I'm focusing on God providing for me. Think about the widow woman. She gave everything that she had, and she was putting it all on God. She was putting her full trust in Him that He would care for her in some sort of way. And that's what we have to do too. We have to keep our eyes focused on God, focus on Jesus in taking those risks. Don't rely upon our own abilities. Don't rely upon our own providing for what we need. We really need to trust God. And let me tell you, that's hard. That's hard. And if I could just be very frank, it was very difficult thinking about leaving this place to go into a very different church that I'm not familiar with. That was a struggle. And there were a number of times whenever I asked myself, do I have the faith to do this? And I have conversations internally. Do I have the faith and trust in God that He will provide wherever we are? Mm-hmm. Whether that's here, whether that's there, whether that's anywhere. Do I really trust in Him? Mm-hmm. And I think each of us have those opportunities in life where we really have to ask ourselves those questions. It's very easy to say, you know what? I'm comfortable. I'm cool where I am. Yes. I'm content. I'm fine. We're good. We'll stay just like this. But have I missed out on an opportunity for God to show His providence? Am I missing out on an opportunity for God to show His ability to provide, even though I might not think it's the best thing to do or the easiest thing to do? I'm robbing Him of an opportunity. He wants to show us His goodness. He wants to show us His ability to work in us and through us for His glory. We have to take those risks. It's not easy. No, it's not at all. But as long as we focus on Him, I have full confidence that our God can provide. He always has done so for his people. He's never let one of His people down ever.
That's exactly right.
I shouldn't think God can be the first.
That's right. And all of that allows us to do this boldly, to live and take risks boldly. Although you can still be a little kiasi and stick around if you want. These illustrations, they show us that certain events are sure to follow other events. If we see a rain cloud that's full of rain, rain's going to come out of it. That's what happens. If we see a tree fall, we know it's going to lie there. If we sow, we know we are going to reap. We should take risk boldly. Don't be deceived. Whatever one sows, that he will also reap. Is it always going to work out really well? No, because that's how life works. Take the risk anyway, because we know that when we sow, we will reap. We know that. This reaping is certain to follow sowing, even in the spiritual realm. And we should live boldly in faith. We're often so anxious about things in the world, not just the coronavirus, which we've obviously been anxious over for a long time, but maybe it's Capitol Hill, or maybe it's Hollywood, or maybe it's Wall Street. Maybe it's our work or our relationships. Maybe it's things not of a secular nature. Maybe it's things within our own church family here. We've got a lot going on. Can we be too anxious about that? We're losing Nick. We've got this preacher search coming up. It's all these fear of the unknown. We're in this really heavy period where we're appointing new elders. That's heavy. We could be anxious about that. We shouldn't be. We should live boldly in faith. Jesus taught us that we should not be anxious about life. Matthew 6:25. Actually, turn there. Matthew 6:25. All right, Matthew 6:25. Do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. And he gives two reasons that lie beneath there for that advice there. First, we worry about things that we have little or no control over. Look at verse 27. Which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his life? We have no control over that. Bringing it back to Ecclesiastes, we have no control over that rain cloud. We have no control over the wind. Secondly, we worry about things over which a loving God does have control. But, in verse 30, if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is alive and tomorrow is thrown in the oven, will He not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Consider, Jesus was talking to some people at this point in time that were right on the edge of financial disaster. They could go from laborer to beggar, and it might just take one bad harvest to do so. The uncertainties in life for the people Jesus was talking to, and maybe in the times of Solomon as well, their uncertainties were real and very threatening. In our world today, we're not worrying about entering poverty. Most Americans are worried about being less rich. In terms of persecution, we're not worried about persecution in the sense that they were worried about persecution. We're worried about being uncomfortable. Our uncertainties are real. They are 100% real. But the practical threat to our basic welfare is not nearly the same as it was and for most of human history. Paul had it figured out, though. Philippians 4:11 through 13. I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low. I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I've learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. What's the secret, Paul? I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. Paul's confidence actually extended to life itself. He was writing from prison. He didn't necessarily, there was some uncertainty in his life. He didn't know how that was going to end up. Life, death. But he knew that the uncertainty of even his own life, he knew that there was no uncertainty about God's love and care for him. So take risk boldly. Reaping follows sowing. It may not always work out, but actually it will always work out. Because who did we read? What did we read in chapter 8, verse 12, I think it was? Who's it work out for? In the end, it works out for those that love the Lord, those that fear God. We know that it ends well for those. So take risk, live boldly, and do it now. Verses 7 and 8. Light is sweet, it's pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. So if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. But remember, those dark days are coming. The idea of seizing opportunity, making the most of time continues. The sunny days are welcome and they bring great joy. And for however long we enjoy them, we must make the most of them with gratitude, with praise, because they won't last forever. And those dark days are going to be many as well. And the dark days could mean a couple of different things. It could be of when we walk as fools in darkness, like we read back in Ecclesiastes 2. Or it could mean, it could be referring to death. And that it would be saying, make the most of your life, whether short or long. For death lasts a long time, and the opportunities will have gone. I can't help but think of the parable of the talents. That's in Matthew 25. We've got time for this. Matthew 25:14. I'm already in Matthew. Let's see. Actually, we just rang the bell. Let's see. Yeah, we got some. Beginning verse 14, Matthew 25. For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called his servants and delivered goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, each according to their own ability. And immediately he went on a journey. Then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5 talents. Likewise, he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received 1, Mr. Kiyasi, he who had received 1 went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So he who had received 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I gained another 5. Verse 21, his Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He who had received 2 talents came and said, Look, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I have gained 2 more talents beside them. His Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter the joy of your Lord. Verse 24, Then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown, gathering where you have not scattered seed, and I was afraid, I was timid, I was avoiding risk, and I hid your talent in the ground. Look, here I have what is yours. But his Lord answered and said to him, You wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited the money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. Mr. Kiyasi in verse 24, 25, 26, you wicked man, slothful, lazy. You could have taken some risk. Take a little risk. Cast your bread upon the waters. What we'll do next week, we're going to end the book. We'll probably do a little review and try to tie everything together. We're going to be talking about growing old a little bit next week. So appreciate your patience with me tonight and your participation.
Good evening. It's time to receive the invitation this evening at our midweek Bible study. I'm always grateful for an opportunity to speak. I don't think I've preached since we were outside. I don't think I've done anything hardly. I want to ask y'all a question. How do you get through a door? Somebody? You got to open it, right? You have to open the door. Doors come up a whole lot in the Bible. Not something we think about that often, but it's a very common reoccurring theme, and it plays into a lot of different illustrations and commandments and all sorts of things throughout the Bible. In Deuteronomy Chapter 6, we see Moses here in verse 4. He begins speaking to Israel. He says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall talk of them when you sit down in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontals on your forehead. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." Moses is commanding the children of Israel here to make God's word and God's love at the very forefront of everything that they do. That's not a theme that disappears throughout the Bible, and neither is the theme of doors, oddly enough. Don't worry, I'm going to come back to that thought. In Paul's letter to the church at Colossae, he writes in the 4th chapter, "Devote yourselves to prayer," this is verse 2, "keeping alert in it with an attitude of thanksgiving, praying at the same time for us as well, that God will open up to us a door for the word, so that we may speak forth the mystery of Christ, for which I have also been imprisoned, that I may make it clear in the way I ought to speak. Conduct yourself with wisdom toward outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. Let your speech always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person." The children of Israel were to make it known to anyone that would see that they were His. It was to be on their minds, it was to be on their hearts, it was to be on their doors. Paul is asking that prayers be made so that a door might be opened to him. A door so that he can show them what Jesus tells us in John chapter 10. He says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs in some other way, is a thief and a robber." That was verse 1. Continuing, I'm going to jump down to verse 7 so I don't have you all here till 8:30. Jesus said to them again, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved, and will go in and out and find pasture." In verse 11 he says, "I am the good shepherd. I am the good shepherd who lays down his life for his sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, he who is not the owner of the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he's a hired hand and is not concerned about the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and I know my own, and my own know me. Even as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, I lay down my life for the sheep." This is the door that has been waiting for God's people the whole time. The children of Israel were commanded to keep it on their minds. Paul is begging for an opportunity to show someone to that door. And Jesus is telling us very clearly that He is that door. So, how do we open it? How do we open it for ourselves? How do we open it for someone else? I really thought Alan was going to give my invitation. You were this close. In Matthew chapter 25, we see Jesus in the parable of the judgment about the king who says to those on his right, "Come, you are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom, prepared from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." And then, of course, we know that the righteous ask, but when did we see you? When did we give you a drink? When did we? But the king says in verse 40, "Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did to one of these brothers of mine, even the least of them, you did it to me." And then the contrast, of course, continues in verse 41 as he says to those on the left, "Depart from me, ye workers of iniquity, you accursed ones, into the eternal fire which has been prepared for the devil and his angels." And of course, we know the rest of the story. Those on the left say, but we didn't do this to you. The king answers in verse 45 and says, "Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did not do it to the least of these, you did not do it to me. These will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life." Doors reveal a lot of things to us. They were to reveal who a child of God was under the Mosaic law. There were supposed to be obvious signs whose they were. Paul is arguably, aside from Christ, the greatest evangelist that is known to us. He's constantly praying for a door to be opened. How? How do we open those doors? Prayer is part of the equation, but sometimes we have to open them. We have to do to the least of these and the greatest of these. We should be treating everyone that we come into contact with, the people we want to be around, the people we don't want to be around. They should see Christ in us. It's easy to be somebody that shares a like mind with you. It's easy to be kind to them and to discuss things with them. What about somebody that fundamentally differs with you on just about everything in this life? Is it easy to show them kindness? Is it easy to tell them that you love them? It should be. But is it? We have to be praying for these opportunities, for these doors to open. And sometimes when they come and they're right there in front of us and we have that opportunity to say those kind words, to show somebody Christ living in us, do we act boldly, as we were talking about in class? Do we pick up the reins and go with it? Do we look for God's providence in our life, as Nick said? We have to. We have to. And I don't know if the invitation song is "Who at the Door is Standing," but if it is, that's really awesome. But think about that song. You know, who at the door is there? But we got to open it. We know Christ is there. We've got to show others Christ. This evening, if you haven't opened the door of your heart to Christ, if you haven't put Him on in baptism, why are you waiting? Now, if you were in the adult class, we talked about the futility and the vanity and the fleeting way that life is. If you weren't in here, you've heard it before. This life is short and we're not guaranteed tomorrow. If you haven't made the choice to put on Christ, why are you waiting? If you've made a mistake in your life, if you need the prayers of your brothers and sisters, don't be embarrassed. Don't be timid. This is the group of people that you should share that with, because we're the ones that should be there to help you. If you have any needs that the church can assist you with, please don't leave here tonight without making them known as we stand and as we sing.
My strength indeed is small. Child of weakness, watch and pray. Find in me thine all in all. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow. Lord, now indeed I find thy power in thine alone can change a leper's spots and melt the heart of stone. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow. And when before the throne I stand in him complete, Jesus died my soul to save. My lips shall still repeat, Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow.
Good evening. So good to see everyone out this evening. Just a few announcements, then we'll be dismissed in prayer. Let's remember those who are shut in and sick. Becky Berry and Clemmy Nichols are not able to be out. And Juanita Atherton, she comes sometimes on Sunday when Kelly brings her. So let's be sure and visit with her when she's here. It is good to see the Winebrenners. Les, you're Betty and you're Les. Okay? Thank you for coming. I hope I can come. I hope I can be just like Les when I grow up. Okay. My wife Janet is recovering well from surgery. Don't have any hiccups there. And let's remember Faye Spence. She is still not fully recovered from her bout with pneumonia. Those who are traveling and away, the Sheffields are out of town, and also Tim Phillips. These are the only ones that I'm aware of. Let's remember, it'll be here soon, that May 2nd, we'll begin 9 a.m. Bible class studies on the first Sunday in May, May 2nd, at 9 o'clock, and worship at 10 o'clock. And again, no evening services on that. And please let one of the elders know of any of the good men that are here that you would like to see serving as elders. I think we've got 4 different names submitted so far, but please let somebody know if you know of someone. Are there any other announcements that we need to make? If not, we'll be dismissed in prayer.
Will you bow with me? Dear Lord, thank you for this day, and thank you for the opportunity that we have to come here and worship you, Lord. Lord, please help anyone sick and shut in, Lord. Lord, please help the spiritually sick find you, Lord. And Lord, Thank you for everything you do for us. And let us come back to the next appointed time.